October 29th, 2024. Well, we're 1 week out from the election now, and so I'll do a quick update on developments there, and then I'll make a few more comments about the Israeli raid on Iran and related issues to that. So in the election, well, we're not too much different than last time. The Real Clear Politics average puts Trump up 0.2% on the national popular vote totals and the polls, and that is the average of all the polls. And I think he's up 0.9% in the seven understood to be battleground states. So, and looking at each of them, he's ahead by a little bit in all of them, some better than others. And the trend lines don't look that bad either. And of course, so that's it's looking still like Trump has momentum to win. The interesting question I still have left is, well, how can the national poll be essentially tied, and yet the battleground states, which are roughly about 20%, 19 to 20% of the total national vote, based on the at least on the last presidential election, which probably will come out something like that. How can it be that with all the battleground states, how can the national thing be that close when you know that historically there's an average of about 4.5% of the total vote is in the Democrat states over the Republican states, and using the criteria of just enough to win, then how much more did each of them have in terms of excess votes? So that indicates that either Trump should do better than what we're seeing finally, or Trump is doing fairly good probably in the blue states, and maybe better than he did last time, or maybe a little bit even in the red states. The data I have on key red states such as Florida and Texas do not indicate a massive improvement over the last time, but maybe a marginal amount. So that may be the whole thing, that extra 7.5 million votes would be spread over the bulk of the blue states, probably not enough to win any of them, but enough to close the race up by a few percent, which might be helpful in the House races, because there's like 40 some states that are considered toss-ups in the House races. So if in the non-competitive states, and many of these House races are in the non-competitive states, so if he's doing a little better, that may help out with the House. However, that still puts us a bit at risk on the national presidential race from where it might be. Nevertheless, everything you get into when you look at some of these states, you'll see a whole bunch of polls indicating maybe even a better Trump lead, and then you'll see one poll or two that has Harris up by even a greater amount. So, such as a Bloomberg poll, in one case it was a Quinnipiac, and so I'm kind of wondering, are those, since there's more actual polls showing a lead for Trump and the other ones being quite the reverse and outside the margin of error, I kind of wonder if those are the ones that are really the outliers and probably aren't correct. Anyway, but again, it's easy in this business to believe what you want to believe rather than what really is. So I would say everybody needs to continue full-scale effort. Make sure you vote for sure, and of course vote down ticket too. The thing that's really appalling sometimes is a situation in which you have the people voting for Trump and then voting for a Democrat for the Senate who's going to absolutely oppose Trump all down the line. So anyhow, anyway, if you like these videos, please give me a like. We're looking for more subscriptions. And of course, click the bell for notification on YouTube. And of course, if you're on Rumble instead, you can also follow me there. The appropriate information in the description below. So so that's kind of how the presidential race still looks good. Trump had a great rally in Madison Square Garden on Sunday and evening, and I think that, of course, the Democrats are playing this thing that Trump was a Nazi or a fascist stuff, which is completely crazy. unwarranted and is the most divisive kind of rhetoric you can imagine, while they accuse, of course, the Trump of being divisive. Well, so, but anyhow, that's the way it is. I don't know how effective that is on anybody that isn't already convinced to vote for Harris, but we'll see. But so that now on to the make a couple of comments on the Senate. I've seen well, looking at the Florida Senate race, it looks like Scott is at about a lead of 5%, whereas I think Trump has a lead in Florida of about 8% in the polling I looked at. So Florida is, again, is considered to be a likely red state. It's not considered that competitive, but it's interesting. Again, you have a Senate candidate that's running a little bit behind the Trump. And of course, then of course, I had some concerns about Texas and Cruz, but the latest two polls I've seen have Cruz up 4%. So I think that Hill Emerson poll may be an outlier. I was kind of concerned, but by the relationship between the Trump numbers and the Cruz numbers on that one, but we'll see. The one I'm really kind of concerned about now is, of all things, is Nebraska, the Deb Fischer race. There's a Republican there, incumbent. And she's the latest poll from, of all things, of course, New York Times, Siena, shows that 48 to 46% race. Now, the other candidate is not formally a Democrat. He's a self-declared independent, but he's a union leader. He's clearly being funded by Democrats. Won't say who he will caucus with, but you can guarantee he's a Democrat. It's a ruse that the Democrats continue to play in deep red states, is to not run a Democrat candidate. I mentioned that before, but to run an independent who really is a Democrat but won't acknowledge that they are. So I don't know. I actually made a small campaign contribution to her today, figuring that that's the one that probably will do the most good. I think they need to get some resources into that one. She is complaining a lot. I don't know. The last polling I've got shows him doing pretty good, but it'd be good to get. I think he's still hanging in there at about 4%. Last poll, well, he's been up to as high as 8 in some. They are trying to do some sham attacks on him, having something to do with a combat wound he got, and they're trying to claim that something about it, self-inflicted. I don't know the details, but it sounds like a typical Democrat dirty trick. Hopefully nobody believes that. At any rate, in a state where people are voting for Trump, for goodness sakes, vote for the Republican for the Senate, too, in order to let Trump get his agenda through. So that's kind of the way I see all the campaign right now. I'm still guardedly optimistic, but, we've got one more week, and who knows what will happen. But I think the momentum is going our way, and all the signs, with it, the erratic Democrat campaigning techniques with wild claims, and on the other hand, the Republicans seem kind of confident, like doing a rally in New York, suggests some good things. Well, anyway, I'll close that aspect and go on to the other issue I raised, was the Israeli raid on Iran and what we know about that. A little more information I've learned since last time. Apparently, one of the main targets, well, they did target a variety of air defense missile sites, the S-300 missiles that the Russians have provided to Iran. They were targeted. And then the main successful target, I think, was a plant where they make the solid fuel for the missiles that they've used to attack Israel with on 2 occasions. And so apparently that plant was successfully destroyed. At least that's the reports I've heard. And they also were able to knock out apparently these S-300 missiles and their radars. So that clears the way for a follow-on attack against the nuclear sites and the oil facilities that weren't struck in this particular instance, which is why this could create a deterrence to an immediate Iranian counterattack, because that might be what the next Israeli attack would then be. And of course, since they're now more vulnerable than they were before, that may cause them to hold off. So we'll see what happens. They certainly have the valuable targets left intact. So it's kind of a classic limited war doctrine stuff. So we'll see how that plays out and what happens next. I was watching an Israeli video on this subject, and one of their people and I guess kind of their experts. And there's some real consideration of where the actual status of the Iranian nuclear program is too. And I mentioned that before, the 4.5 earthquake, which didn't have aftershocks, which is kind of a characteristic of a nuclear test. And what I find most interesting about that is that the U.S. has made no comment on this that I can detect, the actual government, you know. And so I'm thinking maybe if it was a nuclear test, they're not commenting because they would be sort of then forced to take some kind of a stance on the subject, and they don't want to have to do that, the Biden administration, before the election, being a week out. And so that may be why there's kind of a lot of silence on this subject. And it also may have just been a fluky earthquake that didn't have the normal characteristic, but that's kind of scary. And given the degree that we know that the Iranian, nuclear refinement program for the uranium, the separation of U-235 from U-238, has progressed at least to 80% level, and generally 90 to 93% is generally considered weapons grade, at least for, you know, I think that at least for the U.S. standards, although you might be able to get a detonation somewhat less than that, but to get a really efficient weapon, you want to get to that level. So who says they haven't gone ahead and actually gone to 93% for at least a certain amount and have a covert arsenal being developed? Certainly that's the way Israel handled the thing with plutonium originally, but many years ago, and then not acknowledging it. And I'm still focused on how that's going to turn out. But we're still waiting to see what response any of the Iranians make to the strike, and we'll have to keep in touch on that one. So that's about it for this time. I'll wrap this up. I'll be posting this on YouTube and Rumble as always, and the addresses of my social media accounts are in the description below. You can follow me particularly on X because I comment on there more frequently, but I usually post these videos on the others and occasionally make comments there as well. So all for now.